And so the product itself, so now today, Braze, which was renamed at some point,
late 2017,
which I advocated for a while, but the thesis behind it, was it rooted at always going to be mobile and marketing automation, communication? Was that like what it was from the start?
Yeah, so it wasn't, I wouldn't go so far as to say marketing automation, because when we started, we didn't think about marketers being our customers. We actually were thinking about app developers being the customers.
For a long time, and people kind of forget this, but like there was a question of, was mobile going to be its own ecosystem and it was going to be standalone, or were the communication channels going to be like marketing, customer support, you know, whatever, sales, and all those things? Was it going to be like a standalone mobile, or was it going to be verticalized by industry?
Yeah, and you know, to be fair, at the time as well, there were a lot of mobile apps that had a lot of excitement and investment, but there were none that were actually building sustainable businesses, right? Like there was no one that really had a revenue model in mobile in 2011, 2012.
Because the App Store came out in 2008, right?
No, it was a bit later than that. Depends on whether we're talking about iOS or Android. But yeah, we were still in the infancy, right?
Yeah,
we were
early days.
We were in this like period where you could put an app in the App Store and people would download it, exactly because there were so few apps in the App Store that you could kind of download, you know, whatever looked cool, right? App discovery was certainly not a big issue at the time.
So what was the thesis at founding?
Yeah, so I mean, primarily two things. One, that, you know, the huge businesses would be born and built to be mobile first. And then the second one, that the wide scale adoption of mobile by consumers would lead to, you know, a sea change in terms of how we interact with technology, how we interact with businesses, et cetera. And so what we wanted to do was look at mobile both as the consumer touch point, but also look at how it would change our relationship with technology and what opportunities that would afford people building businesses in mobile. And so the founding team, we didn't have experience in marketing. I, you know, speaking for myself, wouldn't have been able to tell you what the acronym CRM or SaaS meant when we started the company. And we were really just from first principles trying to figure out, you know, how do you build a more engaging and long-term user base of a mobile app? So if I've got a mobile app and I want to turn it into a business, I need the kind of usage patterns of my, you know, users to be more than just them downloading the app and then disappearing, right? I need to keep them around. I need to show them value. I need to have them develop habits and loyalty, and you know, become organic promoters of what I'm doing. You know, eventually we would figure out how to have them pay for things as well in order to really drive those revenue models. But that wasn't really part of the mobile ecosystem at the time. I actually remember having conversations in 2011, 2012 where we had this toolkit and we could prove that it helped, you know, drive additional usage of a mobile app over time. And I had this app developer tell me that he actually wanted his customers to stop using his app as soon as possible after downloading it, because he had already sold it to them for $1.99. And the longer they used it, the longer he was going to have to pay for server bills for them, right? And I just remember thinking to myself, like, well, that's not a good customer. Also, this just doesn't feel sustainable, right?
Totally.
Like that model of like, you know, pay a pittance for a mobile app to download it and then you own it forever. And there's an expectation that people will maintain and keep a meaningful service running forever. You know, that clearly wasn't going to work out. And that's why we see that most, you know, successful mobile business nowadays are run on some version of subscription or, you know, continuing transactions and things like that. And that was what we needed to eventually happen because we were really building for the long term. But that wasn't really how mobile was operating in the early days.
So from an architecture standpoint, I think one of the things that was kind of the aha moment for me when we invested was mobile was interesting-ish, but the architectural decisions that you guys made, you were early adopters of Kafka, you were early adopters of Snowflake, you were early adopters of Mongo, like at a commercial scale. And so were you, in terms of future-proofing for all the data ingestion and all that stuff that now enables you to send notifications across email, across SMS, across in-app notification, across web push, all of that stuff, were you just like, hey, this is cool tech and we need to be forward-thinking in the tech that we adopt so that we can recruit cool people? Or were you thinking that, like, hey, setting up this schema and this architecture in such a meaningful way will allow us to have a more holistic view of the customer and therefore be able to be much more flexible in the types of communication we can do.
Yeah, I mean, so it's a few things, and I would also call out that with the exception of Mongo, those other technologies were not in use when we started the company.
Yeah.
And so, we have always been kind of on the leading edge of adopting new technologies. We were also, I was on some of the first alpha technology preview calls for Kafka Streaming and Kafka Connect, which Confluent obviously commercialized. But prior to that, we had already built out a stream processor, largely on our own by kind of pulling together open source software with our own development. And those concepts were baked in from the very beginning. And it's interesting you say, mobile was interesting, but the architecture, because the architecture is exactly driven by what makes mobile unique and special. I think, the other thing is that we weren't held back by an understanding of how marketing technology had been built. So,
which was mostly, all the people that you're now displacing are their architecture is centered off of an email address for the most part, right?
Yeah, the data models are usually centered on email addresses, and a lot of, especially if we're talking about the legacy clouds like Salesforce, Oracle, Adobe, et cetera, which were all kind of foundationally built around these ESPs, like the email server providers founded around 2000. A lot of those products were built to send email campaigns, right? And when you think about kind of the performance demands of something like that, if you, just to take some simple examples, if you have a 5-second delay before you get an email, you probably don't even notice that. You got to switch to your email inbox. Your muscle memory probably refreshes it when you open it anyway. You've already waited 5 seconds.
Who knows if it's the Wi-Fi or whatever.
Yeah. Similarly, like an email campaign goes out, and you're actually, as the sender, probably more concerned about throughput than you are about the time to first send, as another simple example, right? But if you're
throughput being, did it actually get there versus how long did it take to get there?
That would be deliverability. Throughput being like the rate at which something is delivered, right? So, for instance, if it takes me 30 seconds before I send the first message, but thereafter I send at 100,000 messages a second, right? If I'm sending a big campaign out, all I care about is how many got sent in the first minute.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm dispatching a single message to someone, the thing I care about is the latency of that first message, right? And the other interesting thing is that if you're going to be in a product experience, then even 5 seconds is inexcusable, right? You're not going to wait there while a mobile app is frozen for 5 seconds waiting for
your
the
driver's
inbox to load,
on its
right?
way, and at that point you're too
exactly.
frustrated.
There's a lot more real-time usage that happens, and so when you look at the performance pressure of being able to communicate on a one-on-one basis, which was now possible at any time, which was now possible because people were bringing these devices with them everywhere that they went. You were going to have to compete in a more noisy environment because, oh, by the way, everyone else has the opportunity to communicate with people at any time as well. And so we just looked at, what are the pressures that are going to be placed on this combined with the opportunities? We're going to have the opportunity to interact with consumers directly. We're going to be able to, reach out to contact them whenever we want, but we're going to be in a noisy environment, and we want to make sure that the experience is holistic, right? The idea that you would have a separate email team from a push notification service from an in-product messaging or whatever was like not something we ever even considered because we were trying to solve a higher level problem.
Yeah.
The higher level problem was how do you build good relationships with people? And, the answer to that includes being able to communicate with them wherever they are and doing it in a way that's relevant and that is experienced by them as a holistic experience. And so you just kind of take those pressures and you put them on the technology, and it demanded that we build a, real-time capability. And so we did that through one-at-a-time stream processing. Everything in Braze is event-driven. We process new events that come to us instantaneously as they come in. That gives us an ability to be interactive in the moment, which lets us use the same architecture, the same targeting techniques, the same personalization techniques to deliver messages to you in the flow of a product experience in the same way that we would an SMS or an email or whatever that would come out of band.
Yep.
And I think when we looked at that, it was logical. But again, we weren't kind of held back by the way that marketing technology was built because we didn't even know that we were building something that would eventually be used by marketers.
Yeah, it's almost like you were baptized by fire in that mobile. You were ingesting a bunch of different data. There wasn't a single identifier that you needed. This mobile app might be single sign-on through Facebook. This one might be email address sign-on. This one might be third-party anonymous. And so you needed to have the flexibility around that.
Yep.
And then mobile app performance expectations were so much higher. And so it's almost like you had to build for the future of where everything would go, starting with mobile.
Yeah, and then from a systems perspective, there were interesting things too. You look at the email service providers, and their Super Bowl is Black Friday every year. And that like by far is, and like Cyber Monday, just kind of that weekend, that is by far the highest load that they experience in any given year. But that's tied by and large to the US population, which is 300 and odd million people, and it's only for a few days, and it's predictable. You know exactly when it's going to be. The early days of mobile, I remember us having these huge traffic loads on Thursdays, and we like didn't know why in the early days. And it was like, it turned out that we had this application called PicStitch, which people would use to make, like composite images that they would post on Instagram for Throwback Thursday. And us being kind of, out of the loop, we didn't know about Throwback Thursday, but we were just getting these massive server loads every Thursday. And then we started to bring on other international clients, and it's like Black Friday is a big deal. What's much bigger deal is the Cricket World Cup, right? And not only that, but that's happening at least on a surprising schedule to us, because we don't even know what these culture events were that were leading to massive audiences, and they were often happening in the middle of the night in Eastern time or what have you. And so from a kind of trial by fire standpoint, definitely the ability for the system to be able to elastically scale up and down in response to demand that would often just show up and then be globally distributed. There's it basically looks like being hit by a distributed denial of service attack all the time as these things happen. And in many cases, we would cause them as well, because if you send out a campaign and the campaign works, then everyone suddenly shows up in the app at the same time as well. So we were dealing with really big audiences. They were spread out around the world. Their load demands were unpredictable. And we were trying to deliver on this performance guarantee that was just as capable of delivering, an email as it was of actually rendering something in the flow of a product experience, which has much higher demands on it.